Professional fighter. I fought professionally then, and Bruce was very, very good, but he never fought in the ring.
Really?
He never fought in the ring.
At 85 years old, Chuck Norris isn't just a Hollywood legend. He's living history. His name alone brings flashes of jaw-dropping martial arts, unshakable grit, and the kind of toughness that turned him into a global icon. But here's the twist. The Chuck Norris the world thinks it knows is only half the story. Most people remember him as the invincible lawman from Walker, Texas Ranger, or the man who went toe-to-toe with Bruce Lee in one of the most famous fight scenes ever filmed. But what almost nobody talks about is the other side of his life, the struggles that shaped him long before the fame, the heartbreaks that nearly broke him, and the tragedies he still carries with him today. For example, did you know that Chuck Norris grew up in crushing poverty, so shy and insecure that teachers thought he would never achieve anything? Or that his father's battles with alcohol turned his childhood home into a place of constant fear? And here's one more that may shock you. Behind all the jokes about his invincibility, Chuck has suffered devastating personal losses, from family tragedies to heartbreaking betrayals that no amount of fame or fortune could erase. And that's why this story matters, because Chuck's journey isn't just about winning fights on screen. It's about surviving the battles no one else ever saw. So, if Chuck Norris ever made you cheer in a movie theater, or if his strength once inspired you to stand a little taller in your own life, hit the like button now. It's more than just a click. It's a way of honoring a man who, even at 85, stands as proof that real heroes are forged in pain as much as in glory. But stay with me, because the truth only gets more intense from here. The shy, broken boy from Oklahoma didn't just dream of becoming strong. He was forced into it by a childhood so dark that most of us would have crumbled under the weight. And it was in those years, long before Hollywood, that the vow was born. Chuck Norris would never be weak again. Before he was the unshakable hero of the screen, Chuck Norris was just Carlos Ray Norris, a boy born in 1940 in the tiny town of Ryan, Oklahoma. And unlike the larger-than-life figure we know at 85 years old, his beginnings were anything but heroic. In fact, his childhood was marked by fear, poverty, and a home that often felt more like a battlefield than a safe haven. His father, Ray Norris, had returned from World War II carrying invisible wounds. The battlefield had followed him home, and instead of medals or honor shaping his legacy, it was the bottle. Alcohol became his refuge and his family's nightmare. For young Chuck, the sound of his father's footsteps late at night wasn't a comfort, but a warning. Would tonight bring silence, or would it erupt into chaos? Chuck would later admit that his father became a negative role model, someone he swore he would never become. And his mother, Wilma, was the one who kept the family afloat. She worked tirelessly, even hiding money in hopes of feeding her boys, only for her husband to stumble home and snatch it away. Every dollar, every shred of peace was fragile and temporary. But the darkest moment came when Chuck was just 14 years old. His father's rage boiled over, threatening to destroy everything. And in an act of desperate courage, Chuck grabbed a hammer and stepped between his mother and father. Imagine that. An introverted, shy boy, hands shaking, heart pounding, but refusing to back down. That night, Chuck made a silent vow. He would never be the man who brought fear into his family's life. By 16, Wilma had reached her breaking point. Gathering Chuck and his brothers, she fled to California, leaving behind the storms of Ray's violence. It was a move that saved them, but it didn't erase the scars. Chuck was painfully shy, struggling in school, and carried the shame of a broken home. Teachers overlooked him, classmates dismissed him. Nobody could have guessed that this quiet, insecure boy would one day become a global icon. But here's the twist that few saw coming. While Chuck felt powerless, the seeds of strength were already inside him. The pain, the humiliation, the fear, they were all forging something unbreakable, because the shy boy from Oklahoma wasn't destined to stay invisible. And the real turning point came at 18 years old, when Chuck traded a life of fear for the discipline of the United States Air Force. That decision would take him across the world to South Korea and into a discovery that changed everything. In 1958, at just 18 years old, Chuck Norris made a decision that would completely reshape his destiny. He enlisted in the United States Air Force, trading the instability of his past for the strict discipline of military life. Stationed in South Korea, he entered a world where order replaced chaos, and it was there that he encountered the art form that would transform his very identity: martial arts. At first, it wasn't pretty. Chuck was clumsy, self-conscious, and far from the powerhouse fighter the world would one day know. But inside him, something clicked. Taekwondo, judo, and karate gave him what his broken childhood never had: structure, purpose, and a sense of self-worth. For the first time, the shy boy who once walked the halls of school invisible had an identity. He practiced relentlessly on the mats of Osan Air Base, falling, stumbling, getting knocked down, yet always rising with the determination never to feel powerless again. Chuck later admitted, "I was a very shy kid, not much of an athlete, not a standout in school, but martial arts gave me an identity." And that identity began to burn like fire. By the time his service ended in 1962 and he returned home to California, he wasn't just another young man looking for direction. He was a man obsessed, carrying with him the discipline of a soldier and the fire of a martial artist determined to prove himself. He took odd jobs, worked as a military police officer, and scraped together enough to open his very first karate school. The room was small, the mats worn, and often there were barely any students. Sometimes the floorboards echoed only under Chuck's own footsteps as he swept the studio alone, waiting for students who never came. But failure didn't stop him. It fueled him. Money was tight, doubts were loud, and more than once he questioned whether he was wasting his time. But deep down, he knew he wasn't just teaching kicks and punches. He was fighting for his future. And soon he would put that fight to the test in the brutal arena of karate tournaments. What followed would be years of crushing defeats, humbling losses that tested not just his skill, but his spirit. But every failure pushed him closer to greatness, because Chuck Norris was never built to quit. And in 1967, at 27 years old, he finally broke through. Chuck Norris captured his first major karate championship in 1967, and from that moment, his rise was unstoppable. Between 1967 and 1973, he dominated the karate circuit with relentless precision, holding the title of professional middleweight karate champion for 6 consecutive years. He was no longer the shy boy hiding from bullies. He was the man everyone else feared to face. But for Chuck, it was never just about trophies. It was about transformation. Every punch, every kick, every victory was proof that he had turned childhood scars into strength. He opened more karate schools across the U.S., teaching not just fighting techniques, but values, respect, perseverance, and discipline. Students came to him for martial arts, but they left with lessons in life. and Hollywood was beginning to notice. His skills, charisma, and quiet intensity made him stand out in an industry that was hungry for action heroes. But his defining moment, the one that would etch his name into cinematic history, was just around the corner. It was 1972, and destiny was about to place Chuck Norris across from none other than Bruce Lee. The year was 1972. Chuck Norris was 32 years old when he found himself inside Rome's ancient Colosseum, facing Bruce Lee in Way of the Dragon. What unfolded wasn't just a fight scene. It was a cinematic showdown that would become one of the most legendary battles ever filmed. The world watched as Bruce Lee, already a martial arts icon, squared off against Norris, the powerful American challenger with unmatched precision and raw intensity. The fight was choreographed, yes, but it was so real, so visceral, that audiences gasped at every strike. And yet, when the dust settled, history recorded Chuck as the man Bruce Lee defeated. It could have been a curse, a label that followed him forever, but instead, it became a launchpad. The Hollywood couldn't ignore him anymore. His presence was too commanding, his aura too strong. Audiences remembered not just the fight, but the fighter. Still, breaking into Hollywood wasn't easy. The late 1970s were dominated by giants: Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Clint Eastwood. Chuck's early films struggled, often stumbling before finding their footing. But just like in karate, every setback only made him sharper. Then, in 1978, at the age of 38, he finally broke through with Good Guys Wear Black. The clean-cut, disciplined hero struck a chord with a restless America. From there, the momentum only grew. The Octagon, 1980, Lone Wolf McQuade, 1983, Missing in Action, 1984, Code of Silence, 1985, and The Delta Force, 1986. Chuck Norris had arrived, not just as a martial artist, but as a bona fide movie star. But behind the applause and the box office numbers, there was a shadow that never left him. Because every time he put on the uniform of a soldier, every time he stepped into a battle scene, he was haunted by a loss far greater than any Hollywood script could capture. Chuck Norris wasn't just fighting villains on screen, he was fighting ghosts. The most painful of them all was the memory of his younger brother, Wieland Norris, who served in Vietnam. At just 21 years old, Wieland was killed in combat after bravely warning his unit of an ambush. He sacrificed his own life to save others. The telegram that arrived shattered the Norris family and carved a wound in Chuck's heart that would never heal. Years later, Chuck admitted, "His death left a hole in my heart that will never heal." And at 85 years old, he still carries that wound. Every war film he starred in, every time he shouldered a rifle on screen, he wasn't just acting, he was reliving that loss. To audiences, Chuck looked invincible, but behind the stoic expression was a brother's grief, raw and permanent. His films became more than entertainment. They became tributes. Each character he played was a reflection of Wieland's courage, each victory on screen a way of honoring the brother he could never forget. And yet, life had even more heartbreak in store. In 1958, at just 18 years old, Chuck Norris married his high school sweetheart, Diane Holakek. For 3 decades, she stood by his side through the struggles and the rise to stardom. Together, they had 2 sons, Mike and Eric, who grew up watching their father transform from karate champion to Hollywood icon. But fame is not kind to marriages. The constant travel, grueling film schedules, and the pressures of success took their toll. By 1988, after 30 years, their marriage collapsed. For Chuck, it was devastating, not a public defeat, but a personal one. The kind of heartbreak no trophy or paycheck could mend. And then came a revelation that shook him to his core. A woman named Dina wrote to him claiming she was his daughter, born in 1962 from an affair during his early military years. Chuck had never known. For 26 years, she had lived her life without him. When he saw her face, he instantly recognized himself in her. The guilt was crushing. "I missed her entire childhood," he confessed. Though he built a relationship with her later, the regret of lost time never left him. By this point, Chuck Norris was one of the most famous men in the world. But behind the fame was a man carrying regrets, losses, and scars that cut deeper than any injury he sustained in a stunt. And just when he thought life had tested him enough, another blow came. This time through a friendship he deeply cherished. In the late 1980s, Chuck formed a close friendship with Lee Atwater, a rising star in American politics. Their bond was unusual, but genuine. Nights of laughter, deep conversations, and mutual respect. Then, in 1990, Atwater collapsed during a speech. The diagnosis? An inoperable brain tumor. He was just 39. Chuck stood by him during those final months, watching the vibrant, charismatic man fade away. At 40, Lee Atwater was gone. For Chuck, it was another brutal reminder. No matter how strong, how brilliant, or how determined a man might be, life could end without warning. It was a lesson that stayed with him and still lingers as he reflects on mortality at 85 years old. But even through grief, Chuck's resilience carried him forward. And in 1993, at the age of 53, he stepped into the role that would immortalize him forever. From 1993 to 2001, Chuck Norris became Cordell Walker, the Texas Ranger who fought for justice with unwavering morality and fists of steel. The show aired in over 100 countries, making him a global icon. Children idolized him, adults admired him, and even the Chuck Norris facts and internet jokes only added to his legend, proving just how deeply he had embedded himself into popular culture. Yet, behind the fame, the grief of losing his brother, his marriage, and his friend never faded. The invincible lawman on screen was in truth a man carrying invisible scars. Still, his discipline and resilience kept him moving, until life tested him with the greatest battle of all. Not in war, not in Hollywood, but at home. In 1998, Chuck found happiness again when he married Gina O'Kelly, a former model 23 years his junior. They had twins, Dakota and Danilee, in 2001. For a while, life seemed peaceful, a second chance at family. But in 2013, tragedy struck. Gina underwent a routine MRI with a contrast dye, but something went terribly wrong. She developed severe complications, later linked to gadolinium deposition disease. Her body trembled, weakened, and her voice faded. Chuck watched helplessly as the woman he loved deteriorated before his eyes. He poured millions into treatments, even stepping away from Hollywood entirely to care for her full-time. "She's dying right in front of me," he admitted. For fans, Chuck was still the unbreakable Walker, but at home, he was simply a husband in despair, pacing hospital corridors and praying for her survival. And yet, in those darkest years, Chuck revealed his truest strength, not the kind that wins fights, but the kind that refuses to leave a loved one's side. At 85 years old, that devotion remains his greatest legacy. Today, Chuck Norris lives on his ranch in Texas, surrounded by his wife, children, and grandchildren. His fortune is estimated at $70 million, but wealth has never defined him. What defines him is the resilience carved into him by every battle he's faced, on screen and off. He continues to support charities like Kickstart Kids, a program he founded in 1990 to give at-risk children the same discipline and hope that martial arts once gave him. Because if there's one lesson his life teaches, it's that true strength isn't about never breaking. It's about rising every time you do. At 85 years old, Chuck Norris is no longer the man who could leap across the screen with unstoppable energy. His movements are slower, his body softer with time, but his story stronger than ever. Chuck Norris has been called many things: fighter, hero, legend. But the truth is, his greatest victories were never the ones in the movies. They were the ones no audience ever saw. The nights he shielded his mother from his father's rage, the grief he carried for a brother lost to war, the heartbreak of divorce and regret, the devotion of a husband who refused to leave his wife's side. At 85, his life stands as proof that strength isn't about being invincible. It's about enduring the blows life throws at you and finding the courage to keep standing. So now, let me ask you, what's your favorite Chuck Norris memory? Was it a movie, a TV episode, or maybe even a quote that made you smile? Drop it in the comments below. I'd love to hear what Chuck means to you. And if this story inspired you, hit like and subscribe for more timeless Hollywood legends. Because as Chuck Norris shows us, heroes aren't just born. They're forged in struggle, heartbreak, and love.